of School of Planning at CEPT University in Ahmedabad from 1984 to 1992, and later the Director of National Institute of Urban Affairs, New Delhi, India, from 1992 to 1997. Professor Mehta was awarded the International Water Association's Development Solutions Award in recognition for his contribution to research and practice in water. In 2017, he became a fellow of IWA and chair for their specialist group on water sanitation and developing countries. We welcome you, sir. And the last member on the panel is Dr. Mukund S. Babal, who is a professor of water engineering and management in the Asian Institute of Technology, Thailand. In addition, he is also the director for Center of Water and Climate Adaptation at AIT. Professor Babal's professional experience in teaching, research, and consultancy spans over 39 years. Dr. Babal featured among the world's top 1,000 influential climate scientists in the Reuters Hot List in 2021. He appeared in the top 2% list of scientists in the world for research impact based on 2019 achievement in engineering. He is also a board member for Asia Water Council since 2016. He was the director of Executive Board of International Water Resource Association for 3 years from 2016 to 2018. And he was also appointed as a member of advisory committee of the World Water Quality Assessment, an initiative of UN Water Group led by UNEP and GAMS Water. We welcome you, sir. It's indeed a great pleasure to have such eminent, distinguished personalities among the panelists today, and I hope we have some fruitful discussions and a lot of lessons to take away. I now request the chair, Professor Dr. Katya Lash, to take over the discussion.
Hello, good morning. I hope I'm audible. A warm welcome to this panel discussion in this wonderful space here, which is Supreme. We will discuss today governance, policy, and finances for water security. And as we called it in 2030, the UN defined water security as the capacity of a population to safeguard sustainable access to adequate quantities of acceptable quality water for sustaining livelihoods, human well-being, and socio-economic development, for ensuring protection against waterborne pollution and water-related disasters, and for preserving ecosystems in a climate of peace and political stability. I think in this definition for today's discussion we have two major points. The capacity of a population. Now, populations are organized in national states, so we will look a bit into politics and governance. And political stability. So today's panel discussion, we focus on policies, governance, and the contribution of universities and higher education institutions to that. Over the last decades, we have witnessed that the topic of water security is put on the political agenda of many countries. In March 2023, Germany adopted the National Water Strategy. And this strategy and the associated program of water measures lays the foundation for a sustainable management of water resources and the protection of water bodies in Germany. Back in 2020, the European Union adopted the Water Framework Directive, which establishes a framework for the protection and sustainable use of water resources. And if we look at India, the national water policy dates back from 2012, but we've learned yesterday in the presentation of Professor Mehni from the Principal Scientific Advisor's Office that a lot of projects are ongoing on national level, water missions, to pick up the topic on the national level. So water security is high on the political agenda, but it's of course necessary, and we all know that these policies are also implemented. If it stays just on paper, it's not of use. In that context, good water governance is key. Water governance refers to the political, social, economic, and administrative systems that influence the use and the management of water. It's essential about who gets what water, when and how, and who has the right to water, its related services, and their benefits. How societies choose to govern their water resources and services has a profound impact on people's livelihoods and the sustainability of water resources. So setting policy frameworks and establishing governance on a national level is usually a top-down process. So it comes from the top and then it goes, in most of the cases, down and hopefully is implemented. But public policies that seek to deal with challenges like water security will only work if the choices made by decision makers technical or political, are informed by the best available evidence. And this is why research is essential, and here the universities and research institutions come into the picture. So research can produce good evidence to inform local, national and international policy that in turn has the potential to transform lives for the better. Now what we would like to discuss in this panel discussion is, should research influence policy? How research can influence policy and good governance? And we would also look into the question a bit of financing and having a focus on public finances. So how should national states, national system support funding research in the field of water security, and what are the funding gaps? I'm extremely glad that on my panel I have specialists from different fields, I have to say. And looking in the CVs, Professor Rajan is working on the interface of social and environmental encounters. So the perfect person to talk with us about getting stakeholders on board and getting also not just research stakeholders on board in consultancy and advocating. Andre Lindner conducted postgraduate studies of environmental management program, and he worked with multiple stakeholders, amongst them experts from government, non-governmental organizations, science and business. So he has also a broad outlook, and we could also enlarge our perspective a bit with him. Now, Professor Mehta from Ahmedabad, it was interesting to see that you headed the National Institute of Urban Affairs in Delhi, and you have a strong experience in urban policy, urban planning and management. And I found also interesting that you were responsible for the UN habitat in Nairobi, so you could also contribute a bit, not just with the Indian perspective, but bringing in also the perspective from the African continent. Now, last but not least, Professor Babel, you've been active in Germany, the UK, India, Japan, and Malaysia, so broad international experience. And besides teaching and researching, you're also doing consultancy. Now let's see if that's for business, if that's for policies, and what is the outcome of these consultancies. For a start, I would like to ask each panelist to give us a brief opening statement, and if you could relate in your opening statement to the following question: why universities should facilitate knowledge transfer, and can they really contribute to policy decisions? I don't know who would like to go first. Maybe Professor Rajan?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Katia. Dr. Ulash. I feel a little out of place in this panel because I'm not a water expert like my fellow panelists. But let me start by saying a few things about higher education itself and what we might want to do to higher education in the water sector or any other sector involving sustainability. Well, first of all, it seems pretty clear that higher education is treated as a kind of scarce commodity, and it shouldn't be. I mean, take this place for instance, IIT Madras or any of the IITs. Getting in feels like winning a lottery ticket, and there are many very bright students in campuses like IIT Madras, but there are also millions more who could be getting similar levels and of quality education. Today, higher education is in crisis around the world, precisely because of this reason, that it's treated as if it's a protected commodity. People do research, and the research outputs are behind paywalls, hard to access for the general public. In general, any kind of coursework, despite the promise of open courseware and so on, there's very little effort made to democratize higher education. In the United States, the issues, as you well know, are far worse because higher education is privatized, and it becomes extraordinarily expensive to get in, and students are straddled with enormous debt from just simply attending college. And God forbid, if you went to a humanities program or an arts program for a master's or a PhD, then chances of recovering those investments are also pretty slim. But we live in a world where, in fact,
and the pandemic has actually given us good reasons to think that this is possible, that virtual education in various forms can actually expand the scope of higher education. We are already aware of that. We're also now seeing new tools in, of course, AI, but also augmented reality and extended reality, where you can actually replicate the experience of being in a classroom and having, interactions face-to-face, even if it's virtual, it's still kind of close to face-to-face interactions with teachers and research associates, research assistants, and so on, for communicating a lot of information. So the question really is, what would it take to democratize higher education? What are the kinds of challenges we have there? What are the barriers to doing that? And how do universities become the first responders in trying to expand this? Thankfully, I'm very happy to let those of you who don't already know that there's a vast program in India, the national program on NPTEL, Technology Enhanced Learning, which makes an attempt to try and make coursework available to a large number of people, regardless of whether or not they're actually enrolled in IIT Madras or any other university. So those are promising efforts, but much more yet could be done. And we're really including questions of, and we really need to ask the question, is higher education something that comes just after school, or is it essentially going to be continuous learning, continuous education? And if so, what kinds of coursework are needed? What is the role of researchers and professors in particular in engaging with higher education? So I think these are issues that we're now at the cusp of technology to be able to answer these questions a little more affirmatively. If not, we're going to see disruptive uses of technology, which are also going to be privatized, which are also going to be locked up in silos, or to be made available at a fee. So we're going to have large, already the big players in the technology have gotten very interested in higher education and virtual learning. There's a rumor that some of them are actually partnering with some of the largest universities in the world to offer courses, but again, in siloed forms, as a sort of sort of ghettoizing and sort of privileging face-to-face those who can afford education in some of the elite universities, but sort of also offering other kinds of courses to others. But I think those kinds of issues really need to be sort of thought through. And the reason this becomes relevant in the context of trying to understand what to do about technology use is that the proliferation of the products of research and learning also needs to sort of be mobilized through these kinds of tools, learning tools. That learning is for everyone. Learning isn't just for those who have PhDs or those who have access through institutions to these kinds of resources. And then the question is, how do we actually impart information, not in a sort of a top-down manner, but find ways to actually allow these kinds of resources to be much more widely available and to develop the tools and technologies to ensure that people everywhere have the necessary access to resources as and when they need it.
Yeah, thanks so much. So we need bottom-up process, bottom-up availability, and of course higher education institutions are those who educate also the policy leaders of tomorrow. Andre, let me go to you. We had a brief discussion this morning, and we know in Germany there's a long discussion on the so-called third mission of universities. So teaching, research, but then under third mission comes a lot of activities. Now, What should the university do with regard to policy? Is the Technical University of Dresden into policy courses on the national level, on the local level? Maybe you can give us a brief on that about these activities.
Yeah, Katja, thank you for the question. And first, I also want to respond to some of the things said already. For the responsibility of higher education units, also in transfer, but also in research and education, of course. And I think that a lot of the things we'll deal with, climate change, adaptation, water security, which are in the focus here on this event, is the complexity. And to translate this complexity to people who are not dealing with such complex systems on an everyday basis, this is, I think, must be done by universities, or universities must support to do this effectively. In terms of the third mission and to transfer this, the outcomes of research, I think what must be also accepted from the other side, the receiving end, is that science in its core must be able to correct itself. That's the whole thing. We are not at the end of all circumstances truth, but on the other hand, that there are certain consensuses in science. So gravity is a thing, as is climate change. So this is something you can discuss, and we should be able to correct ourselves, and some things are not and must be the baseline for any further discussion. And I want to quote very briefly Carl Sagan, one of the great educators, an American professor and astrophysicist. He once said that our society is tremendously dependent on science and technology, but barely anyone knows about science and technology, not in this room, but in general. So to bring this knowledge into the decision-making bodies is really, really important from my perspective. And what we see from our case studies also at TU Dresden, of what we do, that small seed funding in capacity building can have a tremendous benefit. So the cost you put in comparatively little, but when you support the right people at the right place, it can have really a significant effect. And to close, yes, TU Dresden is active, either to try to support and advise the government in Saxony recently on what the biodiversity convention, like the global convention, will mean for regional policy making, but also at the level of the United Nations, where we and the ABCD Center were present at the United Nations Water Conference in March this year, and also at the UN SDG Summit recently in New York, where, by the way, TU Dresden and with the partners of the ABCD Center, we were the only official side event by an academic institution accepted on this SDG Action Week. And I can say yes, and we should do more, and we received the feedback that this is the right way to do it. Thank you.
Thanks for that short brief. Professor Beta, I found it interesting in your CV, so you have been in science and research, then went to policies, coming back, so oscillating between the two. So what do you think, what you could contribute as a researcher, as a scientist, when you had the position in policy advising, for instance, in the National Institute of Open Affairs, and could you bring your research background into that?
Hi. First of all, thank the chair and the organizer. Many of you may not know, but this is my alma mater. It was like in 1967, when this campus was 1/3 its size and 1/10 the student population that I had entered here. Now, in terms of the education that you talk about, I think institutions such as, and in some sense I was privileged to be at IIT Madras and then Harvard and then Penn, so sound is not coming good because there is an echo also. So we need to check some. Is this better?
Is this better? Okay. Excellent. So, I think having straddled education in many of these quote unquote the better universities of the world, and then working at, as you said, at the National Institute of Urban Affairs, where we were involved with urban policies, and then the UN Habitat, where I worked for 10 years. Now, I feel that our education system has to be rooted in the, I would say, the practice of the profession. and if you are talking about engineering. And I'm reminded back in the 1967 when we joined IIT Madras, it was a 5-year program, and we spent 2 years, or first 2 years, every alternate week we were in the workshops doing carpentry, smithy, joinery, and the philosophy then was that you cannot be a good engineer if you only spend time in your classrooms. You also need to be in the workshops, and we all did that, and that was a great learning, although as students we were often shouting at the time we spent. At the CEPT University, where we primarily teach architecture and urban planning, again we feel that 50% of the students' time has to be on the practice and 50% theory. Because if you are talking about a profession, then they must be engaged in the professional activity. And this is something that will make the students and the faculty members involved in looking at the contemporary issues. And I personally believe, and apologies to all of you who do hardcore fundamental research, that we at our center and at our university believe in what we call action research. We believe in doing research that informs the policy making. We believe in working with the governments, who are the primary policy makers, and we work at all levels of government. We work at the city level, we work at the state, and we work with the national government. And just, I will use the example of sanitation. We are actually fortunate. One of the major foundation of the world gave us almost $15 million for our research work on water sanitation. And they were very benevolent foundation, so it is unlike research grant where you produce series of outputs. It was a learning grant, so we were about, so I will not name it in public, but at lunch we can mention who they are. We started working on sanitation in the state of Maharashtra. Working with the state government, we identified that they wanted the state to become open defecation free. We said, what is the definition? How can we make this? So how do you define open defecation free state? We started working at the city level, and then the national government picked that up, and then it became a national program on Swachh Bharat mission and making the country open defecation free. This is one example, but we have consistently attempted to work at the local level. We use cities as what we would call laboratories. And they are not the laboratories that IIT has, but they are real laboratories on the ground where we work. Our students go to those disciplines where they work, and the learning from there informs the academic work as well, but also the policies of the state and the national government. And I think that's in some sense the role that higher education institutes need to perform. How do you get funding? We will come to that.
Thanks for that. Maybe a brief question. So, is it in your opinion easier to work with local governments first instead of aiming high and going on a national or supranational level?
I think you have to work at all levels simultaneously, and because it's in some sense, the learning from the local governments will be what gives you strength of saying what is happening at the local. But the policies are made primarily, at least in this country, at the state level and at the national level. So we need to be working at that level simultaneously.
Thanks a lot. Professor Babel, you are coming here all the way from Bangkok to us. And, I was reading into your CV, so hardcore modeling, water resource modeling, so hardcore science, and then I read that you do also consultancy. So how you bring that together, being somebody involved in fundamental research, but also in consultancy. So what is your contribution outside of your lab where you do the modeling?
Thank you very much for this quite interesting question, and also three of my colleagues have put forward their views. I would rather put it in a different way. The role of universities have changed. In the past, when I was doing my PhD about 30 years ago, the universities were supposed to do research. But now, the universities must follow transdisciplinary research. So there are key word of transdisciplinary research. And what I mean to say that, as you said that I started with hardcore engineering, I did a lot of modeling and I went to consulting, and I can tell you that I don't do research now which has got no relation with the real world problem. And that is what is required now. So the gap between the university, the research and the practice and on the field has narrowed down over the time, and it's going to further narrow down with the kind of efforts being made by. So universities are no more producer of knowledge. They should not be the producer of knowledge. There are two ways to look at it. One is that how this knowledge is useful. Other way around is that you start with the real world problem, look at the answer, whether it's policy driven or practice driven, and without that you shouldn't do research. When it comes to water security and climate change issues, this whole conference was initiated by me, 2016. First time we did it in Bangkok on water security and climate conference. And the challenge that time, and I still believe that the whole idea of this conference was to bring in two communities together, the climate community and the water community. And why? That there is a very clear link between climate and water. And if you, and I'm of the opinion that a improved and sustainable water management could also address the climate change issues, climate change challenges. Another second point which I would like to emphasize on is communications. The role of communications which Dr. Our colleague was mentioning, Rajan, right? Yeah, he was mentioning communication is very, very important. Now, that could be through capacity building, that could be through citizen science perspective, and that would increase the... Now, coming back to, I would rather go one step further, that it's not the role of universities to facilitate knowledge transfer, it is their obligations to transfer this knowledge to the society, to the community, to the policymakers and practitioners. Maybe I will stop here for the first round.
Thank you so much. I would like to highlight, please note down all your questions. We're going to run another set of questions here, and then we open up the discussion for the audience. So please, if you have a thought, you have something you would like to ask, give us another 10 minutes, and then we open up the panel for questions. I would like to go a bit into governance issues, and you mentioned it's the obligation to provide knowledge. Citizen science, you mentioned, and Professor Raja, maybe I go to you because you were heading the Indo-German Center for Sustainability, and I know you've been quite active in that regard. What can citizens contribute to good governance, and how we can facilitate the participation of local citizens into good governance and into policies? Maybe you can share some ideas on that.
Thank you. This is a difficult question, obviously. At least in democratic societies, there are opportunities for citizens to play such roles. And I particularly was very interested in what Professor Mehta was saying about these living laboratories. And I think these living laboratories are spaces where citizens and researchers work together to come up with solutions, because as researchers we have certain theoretical knowledge that might work in, and practical knowledge that works in labs, but working in the field is a completely different experience. So I think working together, working as co-collaborators, not as transmitters of knowledge in every single instance, not as experts, but as resource persons along with locals. I think that's a way of building more participatory methods. And I'm sure Professor Mehta's, from his reputation, I know that these are precisely the kinds of values that he would be involved with as well.
Let me challenge you here a bit. I come from Germany and I've been 4 years into India. Now, if I look at all the wonderful campuses, be it IIT Madras, be it IIT Kanpur, be it IIT Bombay, I've been 2 days before in IIT Tirupati and IIT Tirupati. How you manage to integrate citizens if the elites of the countries are close to campuses, sometimes very far off the cities, like an IIT campus, or how you manage to nevertheless get in touch with citizens and develop projects which help for good governance, because sometimes I have the feeling the elite in India is a bit segregated from the real day-to-day life.
No, that's an important question. I only talked about one type of governance, which is participation and sort of trying to get inputs from local communities. But one can think about multiple levels. So one really must work with, like Professor Mehta again said, talking with state and local governments, talking to the central government, working. So we have the power, we have the ability to mobilize people. We need to sort of recognize that, and we shouldn't be too modest about it. But at the same time, we shouldn't sort of undermine the efforts of local communities. So that's why keeping communities at the core, to me, seems to be a very important step.
I think the questions remain how to bridge that and how then you bring science and the communities together. But I think multi-dimensional perspective and stakeholders is a good point. Professor Mehta, let me go back to you, as you've been actively in policy advice. Did you work more in networks, or was it more one-to-one, one institution to one local government? So what role networks could play in the whole discussion, transferring knowledge to policy?
Yeah, I think let me start with a story and then come to this. When Meera, who will speak in this afternoon, she worked with the World Bank and I was with the UN. When we came back to India, we found that there was tremendous investment taking place in urban infrastructure. There were all these missions going on. In those days, Jawaharlal Nehru mission. We asked a simple question and we said, how much water is being supplied in this city today to the people, and what will this infrastructure lead to, and how much more water will be available to the citizen? Oh no, we have 1,000 crore investment and we will build 150 kilometers of road, network. What is the service? So we started to say that there has to be a difference between what we call infrastructure and what we call water services. And now we understand. So now we talk about per capita availability of water. Now we talk about inequity in the society and how much slum dwellers. So we developed, and that is where the major donor support came to us in terms of developing this whole performance assessment system for water sanitation. And today, if you go on your mobile phone or laptop, pas.org.in, you will see information of 1,000 cities in India and what is the water availability. Now this we couldn't have done on our own. We needed the networks, we had the governments, so we work in 6 governments of the country, we work with many local partners, and so that's the network that is needed to bring in the information. On sanitation, there is a whole alliance that has been set up, because at least all the engineers, and when I studied in IIT, we were only taught how to design sewer systems. But in this country of 4,000 cities, there are only 300 cities that have sewer system. The rest of the cities have only a septic tank and pits, etc. So the whole non-sewered system, what do you do with that? IITs never taught us. So we had to learn ourselves, and then we found that there are many similar organizations and entities. Some of them are sitting in the audience. So in different states, we work in Maharashtra, Odisha, Tamil Nadu, and Andhra Pradesh. And these are so there is a National Fecal Sludge and Septage Management Alliance. We have some 20 organizations that are members, and that is where the power of network comes to inform policies. There are some people sitting in the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. They are working on a day-to-day basis, monitoring, and we have people working with the state governments and the city government. So networks are certainly extremely important. But as I said, in engineering jargon we will say, when you call a network must have a flow. Otherwise it's only a graph. So the flow is the finance, and that is the real challenge of how do we, in my UN days we developed so many networks, once we stop funding the networks die out. Now that is the challenge that will come to in maybe a discussion later on.
Thank you so much. Now I would open the panel at this stage for some questions from the audience comments, so please give us a sign. And if you could briefly tell us who you are and where you're from, and then maybe raise your question, but be crisp, and raise your questions to the panel. I think we have in the front, there was one question.
Hello, my name is Sarit Shashidhar. I'm from Ernst & Young. My question is to Professor Mehta. So you just spoke about the flow, and from your experience, just wanted to ask if you know institutions like SBM, Amrut, Jal Jeevan, all of them have capacity building fund provided. Has there been any discussion or any intervention that government planned where that funding component could be channelized towards academic institutions to conduct those trainings? See, I ask this question because I'm also a practitioner. When we help government with capacity building or this mission implementation, at least my experience has been that that is done haphazardly. You get some few people, get the training going, and that's how it. To my belief, academic institutions are strongly placed to deliver those trainings, but the fund flow is not mandatorily towards an academic institution. So while there is a big investment from 4 missions in India, there is a capacity building component in it, but there is a problem of flow in the network like you mentioned, sir.
Thank you. Like to answer?
No, we are, as an academic institution, certainly involved in this, and I think every institute or every university and program in this country has a professional practice training program. The institutes of management, and I'm sure IITs also must have these short-term courses, etc. I know AITs so there are these short-term professional practice program. Now, the difficulties, and if there is a government officer, pardon me in this audience, but the difficulty is the mismatch. When, as the funding that is available for this capacity building is so standardized that per participant you will get 500 rupees, and for a meal, I don't think this kind of meal that you are going to get will be funded by those kind of capacity, because they have all these such stringent norms that many institutions actually do not want to venture into supporting these kind of capacity building programs of that. But we prefer to have our own capacity building program, where either through the grant funding that the institute has, one can support this program, or the people pay. To the IITs and IIMs, they pay 50,000, 100,000 rupees for a 2-day program. So if there is a value in your program, I think professionals will come to pay. So this is the challenge. I agree with you, there is a lot of funding, but we need to identify that this kind of straight-jacketing of these capacity building program needs to be a little more flexible than what it is today.
Thank you.
Your organization can help some of them.
So I think we have the same problem in Germany, actually, in streamlining funding, because we have the Ministry of Development Affairs, then we have the Ministry of Education and Research, and I think it's a huge difficulty in streamlining funding and make funding accessible and available. Are we having any other questions from the audience? Professor Nistor.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Johan Nistor from University of Ottawa in Canada. First of all, thank you very much for your excellent insight, and I think I'm too close to the speaker here. Now, my question is just trying to get some sort of an idea from you in terms of the training that we provide to the engineers. When I was the Dean of the Faculty of Engineering, I used to tour potential donors, and these were wealthy consulting engineers, usually from various companies, and I would ask them casually, what do you think, how are our engineers? And I almost all the time received the replies to the line of, learn them how to write reports, teach them how to talk to the clients. And I realized by doing so, and I've been a consulting engineer myself, coming from a PhD, and I realized that I didn't know a lot of things. So we try to implement certain measures to provide that set of soft skills, which I think they're more essential skills of engineers. But I'd like to have some ideas from you. What do you do in your own universities, in your own practice, to better prepare the engineers and the scientists to be able to communicate what they research and they find to the public, to the audience, and to the, for instance, authorities?
Matter of science communication, I think. Maybe Professor Babel, as you brought up that topic.
I can also.
In fact, in my first intervention, I made it clear that communication is very important. And that is part of what you have said. I did not elaborate that time. The typical, again I repeat what I said earlier, can we move away from disciplinary knowledge, disciplinary education, to go away from multidisciplinary, go away from interdisciplinary, think of transdisciplinary education. And that brings in the role of all the stakeholders in your education and research. At the same time, bring in the component of communication, which is necessary to be a professional. Even you are a researcher for your whole life, unless you communicate, you are not heard of. You will not be heard. You will not be seen. So these are to be bring in under our curriculum. So can we look at the curriculum from that perspective, that we make a world-class citizen rather than a typical engineer of a particular type, right? The concept of theory of change must be built in our students when it comes to making them real change makers. They must understand, and their research should be linked to what is the real problems, action research. Then you will address the societal challenges and problems, and you get the results which are useful for the society, communities, right? Anybody?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very valid, we often have the problem that our graduates cannot write papers, and what in our universities we now have a foundation program where one of the subject that every student, no matter what discipline they go through, the entire year is spent on writing ability, communication, and so idea is that right at the base when they start off, this foundation course helps them to develop the learning skill and the communication skill. I think with AI and chat GPT, etc., things hopefully will be easier, but I'm not sure.
I think with AI and ChatGPT, you nevertheless know what to feed in ChatGPT to get a good result out. But maybe before I give it to Andre for the reply, I think you can look at it from two perspectives. Either you make an engineer a good science communicator and teach them, or you take a science communicator and teach them something about engineering. So I think you have it to look at it from the two perspectives. So as we talk about engineering, could you maybe give us a hint if something is done in the University of Dresden?
Yeah, not only in Dresden, but like the university system. What is valued at a university of a scientist? How they are measured, how they are evaluated. So it's most of the time scientific publications. So this is a form of communication, but a very narrow one in the scientific community, and by getting third-party funding. And as long as outreach transfer is not valued equally, people will not focus on that because there is no incentive to do that. So this is certainly one thing, and this goes along with the capacity, not of the capacity building, but of the capacity of the people, scientists, also staff at universities, when they are already full with teaching and research, and then, okay, the request even from the ministry comes, do more transfer, do more outreach. When? With what resources? So this has to go along. Not only the request has to be given, but it must have a foundation. And my last word regarding the funding, one step back. So I'm a big fan of the so-called donut economics, which is basically considering the planetary boundaries as the so-called ecological ceiling. And then on the other hand, you need to have the social foundation. So the acceptance and a fair and just system, and economics, and therefore all the funding coming out of this must be in between the ceiling and the foundation. And I think this is a large thing, but there's a problem in economy with what's valued and where we should invest. And if you look what the disaster in Germany in the Ahr Valley, what it cost in the end, 30 billion, the help fund was by the German government. This is 1/3 already for one event in Germany. 1/3 what the UN agreed in the Paris Agreement to give to the Global South in total per year. Even this 100 billion was never reached. But to put this into perspective, and I think this is still a way to go. But maybe that's lead too far here, so I yield back.
Thank you so much. Are we having any other questions from the audience? We go there, and after that question, we look a bit into the funding and finances. But let's pick up that question.
Thank you. My name is Sijo Abraham, and I work at the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. No? My name is Sijo Abraham, and I work at the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. And my question is to Professor Rajan, especially when we are looking at the advent of virtual education and online education. One big side effect that we are seeing is the misinformation campaign. And it's quite evident that misinformation propagates faster than information because of the lack of, let's say, bureaucracy around it. So I wanted to understand and also with the COVID, we have seen how misinformation has spread across and has been detrimental to a lot of people. So my question would be, what do you see the role of universities and professors in larger, and by extension of it to governance, in curbing misinformation and simultaneously actively taking a stand against it? Thank you.
Well, thank you for that question. I think it's a very important one. Academics, scholars, and institutions that guard scholarship have always tried to sort of make sure that scientific knowledge and information is represented well, that it's backed by evidence, that these theories don't come out of the air. And when there are controversies within a particular scientific discipline, the role of actually, trying to have open debate about these questions, backed up again by evidence and logic. So those are actually very, very important roles for universities. No one is denying that. I mean, you can't just give things up to technology. You can't have AI sort of rule universities, and we're going to get into big trouble. So we need responsible people as purveyors of this kind of information. But at the same time, they can't be guardians of that information, right? So Wikipedia is a great example. Wikipedia, one used to think, was a great source of misinformation. But at least 10 years ago, there was a paper out in Nature which did this blind review looking at Encyclopedia Britannica and Wikipedia for scientific articles, and Wikipedia was much more accurate than Encyclopedia Britannica. So why was that? Because there were, citizens and other scientists sort of monitoring a lot of those pages. If you look at the climate change page, for instance, I go there often because I find them teachable, the kind of information on those kinds of pages. So I think there are ways to think about this that are sort of out of the box, but we do need safeguards.
Thanks so much. Let us go a bit to the third keyword on our panel, finance and funding. I would it in that direction. Now, Professor Babel, maybe you can give us an insight into Thailand. I don't have a clue on Thailand. Would you say that in the field of water security, in your field, is the major driving public funds or is the major driving private funds? So who is giving the major funds in the field of water security in Thailand?
You see, water is a public subject. And normally, traditionally, the governments have been funding. But there has been a change, and that change has come because of the importance of the commodity. The government would invest if there is a calamity. If there is a real, I remember 2011 flood which is called a great flood in Thailand, 2011, damage of about $45 billion, the fourth costliest disaster which happened. And that was the trigger for the government to come up with a $10 billion investment from all aspects of research, capacity development, whatever, infrastructure development. So government will act if there is a trigger. Not only Thailand, but across, I work in Asia basically, Asian Institute of Technology. We work in at least 20 countries of South Asia and Southeast Asia. So that's the experience we have. Otherwise, they are driven by donors. The second category is donors. In the past, as we know, most of us, the donors would bring not only money, but they would bring also their policies. And many cases, those policies were failed. Now, this is also going away, is shifting away. And there is a mix of donors plus government is a way forward. But in my view, additionally, if we can design our projects where we bring in the so-called, I would say, beneficiaries or client as a part of this financing, would make it more sustainable. Now, question might come that the poor, marginalized, all these would remain there. then the role of government is there to support that component of the society. And there are good examples where there was a recent project where, you know, we come up with an idea of competition among different proposals within a river basin. And the project will be funded where more contribution is coming from the water users. So there will be a stake, there will be a kind of ownership, and that would make it more sustainable. So personally, I feel that the financing of water and water sector should have a mix of sources. And if there is a good idea, I don't think there is a dearth of finance. There is a dearth of good ideas which can be implemented. Maybe it will trigger some discussions, and I will stop here.
Then you would advocate for an international fund where you could apply for the ideas. Let me look into Germany a minute, because you also said it was the flood last year in the Ahrtal which triggered a lot on discussions on water issues. My feeling, reading the press, I'm not into the field. No donors, we don't have in Germany because we are a donating country. How is the situation in Germany? Is it a mixture of public-private engagement, or is there a focus on the public funding in Germany on certain fields?
That's a tricky question. I try to find my way out as an ecologist, where like the funding measures, either private or public, they're often not connected to what we want to deal with. Which means when talking about adaptation processes and climate change is often long-term, and often also the thing that you communicate is that something already happened which is irreversible, but you will not feel now. But it's already happened, like the tipping point has been crossed and we have to deal with the consequences, but if you apply for this, we are sure we will feel this in 5 years. No, but then you will get funding in 5 years, not now to prepare for it. So there is this connection with this. And then also was already mentioned, and you mentioned, Katja, is that often there needs to be a trigger. So all the warnings are, I will not say ignored, but not taken as seriously. And then only when it already some severe thing happened, we deal with this afterwards. And just again, scaling this up with the pandemic, like it would be so much cheaper to prevent, or it still is, the next one will come for sure, to prevent it than to deal with the consequences of it. And to coming back to the core where public, I think as a university, and at least in my field of the environmental science, we look as a university for public funds. Basically, but I think in engineering there are also private opportunities there, and it is changing. Maybe not fast enough, but also the awareness of this is changing, but maybe there is also some more qualified people also in the audience to add to this.
Thank you so much. Are we having questions from the audience? Yeah, here in front.
Thank you. My name is Antara Dasgupta, and I'm a junior professor at the RWTH Aachen University in Germany. And my question is kind of generally directed. We talked in this round quite a bit about funding and how it's important, and I think Professor Lindner touched upon this very important issue of thinking about adaptation as a long-term measure. Projects are normally funded for 3 years. How can we bridge this gap, or I think there's a very specific term for it, it's called the valley of death. So you have a very nice idea, you do a project on it, funding is over, and nothing really stays on ground. So are there ideas in the panel on how this could be dealt with, or what are just your thoughts would be great on this?
So I think this is an endless discussion, how we overcome the valley of death. Let me answer, and then I give it to the panelists, because I'm working for a funding agency, no? I think we see it always as a push, as a first push, definitely. But what we take care lately of in the projects is there has to be a sustainability concept afterwards. Now, what I see on a day-to-day basis, also in my work in India, is that this is still not really happening. So what I see is there's a project we fund, the project comes to an end, and everybody comes to me, rushes, what is the next funding line I can apply for that project to going on? And I think Professor Babel had a very good idea. Mix of resources, diversification of funds, not just looking into the traditional funding like in Germany, DAAD, the Alexander von Humboldt German Research Foundation. So I feel that still in the university field, from my perspective as a funding agency, one does not really take it serious when we ask for sustainability projects. And very often these questions arise at the end of a project, 6 months ahead, oh, my funding comes to an end, I need to finance my staff. And I think we need to integrate this from the beginning, and diversification of funds is definitely one should work together with universities, but Professor Babel will start.
You know, I have some kind of, suspicion of bringing private sector. Private sector would come only when there is a profit. So we have to be very careful when it comes to water and environmental sector. And there are many failure examples. When water supply in Jakarta was privatized, there are many examples. I would not go into detail of those. But I think somehow if we can bring in this, the capacity of the local people to whom this adaptation project, can we have a project designed in a way that after 5 years it is run by them? That's the key. We can't get a funding from outside continuously for lifelong. So we need to think out of box, as you rightly said. Maybe everybody will not agree to this, but this is what my viewpoint is.
Yeah, no, I think this is a real issue, but the good story is that there are a few, I wouldn't say donors in the sense of the country development agencies, but private foundations. And Rockefeller, Ford, Gates, they have a much longer term view of issues and more benevolent than the bilateral agencies in some sense. So I think there is a possibility of a longer term financing from there. But I think your point is very valid that you are never going to get a perpetual kind of a fund. Although we are lucky, we are doing one project for 10 years now. But that's kind of a rare in research cycle. So one needs to, what we have been attempting to do is, how do you work, and our primary clients are governments. So when we do research, apply them, and then how do the local governments or the state government take it over and start using their funds. So it's like handing it over to them to ensure that the project continues, and then one can keep doing research. But this is, so the ownership right from the beginning is mixed, not your project, but it's a joint project. And as I think back in the days when UN Water was formed, all our UN agencies, there was no agreement. And this is the minute you start bringing multiple donors together, it is very difficult. It will take them a long time to come to a consensus, etc. And the academics and researchers don't have that patience that the diplomats have in negotiations and communication. So I think it will be good if you get, because the funding then comes is much larger than what a bilateral donor could possibly give you, but that's the next step.
I think ownership and institutionalizing and looking at the federal states, I have to say, at least for Germany and India. I think we don't utilize these funds which the states have available. If I look also into India, we have quite active states and there's huge research funds also available, and I feel we don't materialize them also for international projects. Which leads me to my question to you, Andre. You wanted to add on the funding? Yeah.
I just wanted to make a related point on finance. If you look at climate finance, the needs for adaptation finance and loss and damage is running into trillions of dollars per year. So we're really talking about very large volumes of funding that are needed just to address the climate crisis. And we are nowhere near close to getting that kind of mobilization. And I mean, so... Yeah, and we're at COP28. The $100 billion that was promised 10 years ago hasn't been released. So there are serious crises around finance. So I don't think the issue of not having continual support for individual projects matters as much as the larger finance regimes.
Yeah, very quickly, I promise. Coming back to what Professor Babel said, like private companies are only interested when there is like a profit there. But maybe again take a step back, like how companies are valued by their profit. But if you change this valuation, if not only that profit is valued, but the shareholders would value how this company avoid environmental follow-up costs, that would change the picture. And briefly, yes, I'm sure not every scientific project needs to have like a business plan attached. Not every subject will fit, but nevertheless, scientists should include this more, that where it is possible to consider it increasingly.
Sorry, one comment. No. This just reminded of, currently the private companies are being rated on the ESG scale. Environmental, social, governance scale. And I think it is becoming, there is a big debate on whether E is important or S is important or G, but we have begun to look at the ESG for governments and local government. And so we are saying that for these local governments to attract fund, would their ESG rating help them to bring in private funds or donor funds? So I think that's maybe a more comprehensive way to go rather than simple rating approach.
Yeah. I would fully agree not every project needs a business plan. And if we would like to look into CERN or the accelerators, the particle accelerators, for sure not. But we should implement the thinking a bit more, not just heading for the traditional funding which we've been all taught and to head for. We talked about local level and national level. Maybe in the last round, we look a bit at international level, and let us start with the ABCD Center. And we talked about ownership, no? On the funding for the ABCD Center, I'm not completely mistaken, comes majorly from Germany. The funding for that project, and we are currently in a discussion in India, but also in Europe, on the decolonization of knowledge. So how you ensure in the ABCD Center, despite the funding comes majorly from Germany, ownership in Bangkok and ownership in IIT Madras. So how you ensure that in the project, is there ownership and is there a contribution also from the Global South to the project?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Like, I would start with one indicator that this is really, although the funding is coming from Germany, this is a joint effort, equally valued from all parts. Like, I don't know, for me it's the first project I'm in. We meet every 2 weeks with the whole steering committee and to decide most of the time. You know, we have one afterwards, I know. Thank you for the reminder, Professor Pavel. And I think in terms of the ownership, like also of the outcomes, of the outputs of the project, this relies to the all the scientific standards we all value, that this is honored also in this project for sure. And we are also, like, I remember vividly my first time visiting IIT Madras, and I was also introduced to the research park, and we see the opportunities there where we can come up with ideas which also ensure the existence of the ABCD Center when the project funding ends. We are not at this stage yet, but we are certainly planning for it.
Thanks a lot for that insight. Maybe a question related. Was it a co-creation also already in project writing? So how did that happen? Co-creation of the project. Now we see very often that German universities come with ready-made projects, picking up an Indian partner. So how did that go for the ABDZ? And maybe this is also key to success, that there's ownership. Maybe you can give us an insight on that.
I keep it brief, or maybe Professor Babel can also add to this. Like ABCD Center started at 2 bilateral efforts by the call from DEAD, so with Dresden and AIT in Bangkok and RWTH Aachen with IIT Madras here. And this was, of course, on eye level. Both project sketches were developed, and then we came together, which make it even more inclusive and collaborative. And maybe Professor Babel, from your side?
In fact, I wanted to say that only, but then when it comes to ABCD, I would say that the project started, and this is kind of a research and education project and transfer project. It needs some time. We have to work on research projects. We have to work with stakeholders. We are still developing that part, and when we work with those stakeholders, we see the value and we see the so-called possibility of continuity in terms of working with them. This is how I see the future.
Are we having another question from the audience with that regard? Everybody's hungry, maybe waiting for lunch. Then maybe we come to the end of the panel, and let me ask to everybody on the panel one final question. So if you have a wish, yeah, for funding sustainable networks in water security, what do we need and who should do this? So what would you wish if you look into networks for water security? So what would you wish that we get these networks running and sustainable? So if you would have a wish, what you would say?
Me? I thought she said one last word by everyone.
So the question is, if I understood you correctly, the sustainability, wishful thinking. Of course, funding is important.
100 million.
So it should be as big as we can think of. To have real impact, I think we need time and resources, and one of the most important resources is finance. And we are, from our side, we are putting our brain into it. So we need this vehicle to move into the field, on the field, and show something which is useful, which is good for society. So I would not put any $1 million or €1 million, but it should be worth investing and showing the outcomes and impact. I would think of a change which is happening.
My wish, I think, is that there are a large number of small-scale projects going on. Many actors, many universities, but many private agencies and foundations are already working on. I wish that they all come together, and we're making small effort in the district of Kutch in Gujarat, where 2 small towns, we are bringing them together. We are working with a local NGO, we are working with the local governments, and trying to make sure that this city over a long term becomes secure. But our efforts are not enough, and then bring in more partners. And the key challenge for all research is, how do we scale up? How do we, as we used to joke in the past, that there are enough pilots but not enough planes to fly. So how do we sort of get all our pilot projects to move to scale? And I think that's the real challenge, and I hope that networks can do that.
I would say for like decision makers, meaning like governments, national governments, but also maybe the boards of very big international companies, not only the option but the obligation to consult the scientific community in public, that everybody can see that the knowledge is often there and it just, in quotes, needs to be implemented. That would be one wish. And also to restore trust in the big UN, like the COP28 is coming up. It's still the best thing we have. I admire the United Nations as a body. Really, I do, and I'm all for it. Also, the SDGs is still the best guideline we have, but we have to get the people back on board to make it more effective, step by step, of course.
I was struck by something that Professor Balan said earlier about teaching students theory of change. I think it's very important that researchers also understand the theory of change or come up with a theory of change. So my wish would be that that is well articulated before we ask for funding, that we are all clear about what we want, how we plan to achieve it, and what are the steps going forward.
My wish. I think I would. I would go for co-creation. Bring the actors together. Don't come up with projects designed by an agency sitting in the UK, in Germany. Bring those who are affected by the projects together and go for co-creation already from the beginning of the designing of the projects, and not just talk about onboarding. So if you do co-creation, you would not talk about onboarding. This would be my wish, and I hope also my wish would be that WSDRD would perform better in that. But we were working towards that. Okay, we've learned a lot on the panel, I think. So we discussed a bit about policies and governance. I think ownership is one of the takeaways, be it for governance, be it for funding, living labs, more on a local level, which we can scale up, and then influence, diversification of funding is, I think, a keyword we took along. We already have good instruments like the SDG in place, but it takes also obligation to recreate trust in science, to take science seriously on a policy level, but also on a citizen level. So I think there's a lot of things we should work as a scientific community on, not just as a scientific community. I think we also have stakeholders from industry and policy here in the room, and I think what you said, let's bring everybody together on one table. Let's create a network, and let's let the network flow, not just have a network and a list. And I think that's all up to us discussing, taking the discussions forward, and I think that's exactly what we're doing here in these days in the conference. I think we will head now for lunch, so take the opportunity to enlarge your networks and take the discussions forward, and who knows, maybe one or two ideas will come up after the conference.
Check. Thank you so much to all the panelists for bringing out such fruitful discussions, and I hope we take a lot of insights from the discussion. I request Dr. Katya Lash to honor two of our panelist members, Dr. Andre Lindner and Professor Dinesh Mehta. That brings us to the end of this morning session. I request you all to join us for the lunch. Post-lunch, the sessions will happen at the ICSR building throughout the evening. And important information regarding the gala dinner, cultural program, and transportation arrangements for tomorrow will be shared at the end of the session in the evening. Kindly look out for the information regarding the transportations for smooth transfer to the various locations. Thank you. Another gentle reminder to give your choice for the tour and availability for the gala dinner. We'll be closing the sheets by lunch. I request you all to update your availability and the choice before lunch. The volunteers are waiting at the back of the auditorium. Thank you.